Welcome, everybody. So another NAB in the books. We're lucky enough tonight to have 5 great panelists who hopefully bring different perspectives on what they saw at the show this year. And have to admit there was a little shuffling at the last minute. We're very lucky to have, for the first time on the panel, something we've tried to achieve before is a Ryerson student. Will is here tonight. Thank you, Will. We have Paul Briscoe, sort of. He's not actually here, but he was supposed to be here. So filling in, playing the role of Paul Briscoe is Stan Moot tonight, who learned about this an hour ago. So needless to say, does not have a robust presentation, but will join the panelists afterwards. Paul Steckley, a regular guest here, always has a great perspective. I look forward to Paul's presentation. Brian Young has joined us in the past. Where did he go? There he is. Brian also has a unique perspective on things. And then Matthew. Matthew has been here. This is your second time on the panel, is it not? Yes, excellent. So welcome to all the speakers. Just my observations. This was 20-something NABs for me. My first year as in a booth, which was a very different experience. My feet were still sore, but just in a different way from standing instead of walking around. So anyway, we're going to get our panelists up. We've randomly chosen the speaking order because sadly nobody wants to go last, but I think it'll all work out well. So first up, we're going to welcome Paul.
So you have to imagine that I didn't forget my prop on my desk, but I had my a brass coin from the first NAB I ever went to in Chicago in 1970. So I was 12 years old. I went with my father. So if those of you who don't know, Applied was started by my late father the same month I was born in 1958. So kind of been born and raised in the business. So, I try to think of what other people are going to talk about, and I'll try to come up with a few different things and observations. But we'll just launch right into NAB 2019. So, for the third time, I managed to catch the Norwalk virus. In fact, I partially reside in Nevada and know a lot of people in the hospitality industry. And on the hospitality industry website is actually a Norwalk meter for the Las Vegas Convention Center. It is the dirty little secret. Apparently at one point they got up to about 14% of the attendees at one particular trade show got sick. But it has been a recurring issue. So, for example, I was feeling fine, and then 15 minutes later, I was in a very bad shape on Monday. In the same dinner that I had to run out of, 5 other people followed me out at various intervals throughout the night. Sony said their entire IP group and nobody else caught it. About half of Grass Valley caught it. So, but anyways, the ranks were very, very thin on Tuesday because all of us were catching the Norwalk virus. So I won't go into the symptoms. It was really pleasant. The only good news is I lost a little weight, missed 2 NEB hangovers, and got a lot of sleep. So. General impressions, the usual Monday crush was there, but the show definitely felt lighter this year. A lot of people were commenting that they thought the show was lighter. I'll talk a little bit about the attendance or how they calculated or don't calculate NAB attendance. So last year they had this Met effect, and there was actually a Met Theater, Media Entertainment Technology. That didn't go over so well, so they rebranded the show to say the story starts here. So that was all over the various branding and whatnot of the show. The face of NAB continues to change with more IT and non-traditional suppliers growing the ranks all the time. IP was everywhere, but the story is far from clear. So I'll talk a little bit about the IP, where that's going or maybe not going at the moment. RF radio and ATSC were barely visible. It was hard to find, we used to go into the North Hall. That was the radio hall and all the RF stuff. There was some talk about some early ATSC-3 deployments, and I believe in Canada it's still under consultation, so I don't think there's been any firm decision whether or not we're going to proceed with ATSC-3. A lot of hype about 5G, although I couldn't find any thing about 5G there. So people were talking about it. It was on some of the branding, but I couldn't actually find it. So I've brought some bonus material on 5G I've imported. So Still way too much empty space. So, so why do I have to walk to the North Hall? So starting a while back, a lot of customers used to say, you know what, this is crazy. We're not walking 15 miles a day. So Monday is our South Lower day. Tuesday is our South Upper day. As for the rest of us, though, we have to keep running back and forth. So I started to add my usual 12 pictures of big empty spaces that I saw, but clearly NAB could do without the North Hall. But instead of getting rid of the North Hall and making us all walk less, they're actually building a new North Hall, even bigger, and they're planning on using it. So there we go. Just some random pictures. This is one of the products in disclosure. It is a product we carry, but for example, this is one of the IP products that I found quite interesting. This is what they call a network-attached processor. So this takes 64 3-gig HD SDIs, either on IP or through SDI gateways, and basically flashes whatever you want in a modular catalog, a master control switcher, audio processor, whatever. It is basically replacing the modular cards that we've known and used for forever. So it basically is a network-attached device that changes the paradigm of IP systems integration. This is just walking into the South Hall, I took this on Thursday, so it's already starting to thin out. In fact, I took most of these pictures on Thursday, so you can actually see things. Except this picture was taken on the Monday. Black Magic, I had to scratch my head a little bit because Sony had a very large booth, as they always do, a small city. Black Magic claimed to have the biggest booth. They had 2 of them. But anyways, it's one of the most visible, and it had definitely grown since last year. So typical, these are some more or less random photos. Obviously, our good friends at Grass Valley, Chiron, this is basically the South Lower. It's interesting that people talk about the flow pattern of NAB, that it starts in the South Hall, and people don't make it to the Central Hall until like Wednesday. So that's one of the things that exhibitors often talk about, is the way that everything starts in the South Hall. A lot of emphasis on e-gaming. I frankly scratched my head trying to figure out what it is we're covering and what the business model of e-gaming, other than the fact that e-gaming is a huge sport, or is a huge economic endeavor, and that games have long since outpaced motion pictures. But of course, if you actually watch an e-gaming event on Twitch or whatever, you know, basically one HDMI to SDI converter is pretty well all you need to get the picture. So people are covering people in the stands. But I've noticed this kind of awkwardly at NAB in the last couple of years, and at IBC. You see a lot of people trying to capture the hype around e-gaming, but the business case and what it exactly is we're covering, when you sit there and have an OB fan come in and look at people moving their keyboards and whatnot. But anyways, it was a common theme of the show, and everybody tried to have a little bit of it somewhere. Again, these are just sort of random. These are just basically walking down. Ross moved from the North Hall to the South Hall this year. Kiki von Stockhammer. I first saw her, I want to say, well, it can't be 40 years ago, but it was, if everybody remembers the video toaster before it became a Sony product and whatnot. Actually, that was one of the bigger events at the show. One of the things that we've talked about is the rumors normally come out somewhere between Friday and Sunday. So if any company is going to get bought or be bought, or sell, we normally find out about it. But VizRT buying New Tech was probably about the only semi-blockbuster type of announcement at the show. A lot of interest in light production in general versus traditional control rooms. But yes, Kiki was there, and this was the former Ultimat booth that Blackmagic kept. So they had 2 booths, again trying to claim that they were had the most square feet in the show.
It's free now.
Yeah. Yes, Da Vinci's. As usual, you know, AWS and IBM and others, we're starting to see more. They've become perennials at the show. And that's the branding that over at the North Hall, and that's was the branding throughout the show. Is the story starts here. I found this rather intriguing. Remember when the outdoor parking area was really big and really full? Now there's virtually nothing in it. Go figure, you know, once we built trucks, now we have bonded cellular, and who knows, 5G just around the corner. But I found that looked a little sad and lonely out there in the famous parking area. Attendance, total register attendees, 91,000 international attendees. You see it, 24 countries represented, 160. The show final attendance this year, I don't know what changed the arithmetic there, but 92,900. I don't know about you, but I had at least 4 badges printed out, and it is registered attendance. I'm always impressed with the way IBC. I think IBC even has RFID chips in their badges now. But IBC is very, very good at tracking when you go to different halls, and very, very good at tracking duplicate badges and whatnot. So to me, when it says 92,000, that tells me there might have been 60 or 70 actually there. So prices, of course, this is SMPTE. We don't talk about prices, but just as walking around the show, it was pretty extraordinary to see one thing that really stuck out at me. It says, you know, 7, 8 years ago, you never saw a price for anything posted anywhere at NAB. And now, not only are prices for all types of technology falling like crazy, you actually see prices stuck to things, and very low prices stuck to things. So, you know, and we're obviously seeing a change in the business model that goes behind that. So if you look at some of the big companies, traditional infrastructure companies, and you look at the cost of a production switcher, I know our company sold production switchers over $500,000. And now some of the prices and some of the size and some of the things that you can buy that could largely replicate a lot of that expensive old hardware are becoming more and more common, and we're seeing the rest of the industry have to rationalize to these new lower price points. And the difference between what is broadcast quality and what is consumer technology is now really, really shrinking. Let's face it, the average phone these days can take some pretty good video and pictures. So just a couple of examples. I joked that whatever Decimator paid to put that billboard up is probably more than they make selling that thing for $99. But nevertheless, you know, you just would not have seen that a few years ago at NAB to see the main entrance of the show with a big billboard up with prices on it. This is a new company from Norway, I believe, and anyways, everything's same with the Blackmagic booth. We all been on the Blackmagic booth. They were one of the first to show prices beside almost all their equipment, and very low prices at that. 4K and 8K. I really think there's a bit of momentum being lost in the whole 4K and 8K. A lot of us went to IBC, and when we looked at the motion blur at 120 hertz on the super high vision NHK displays, it was significant. So, you know, at 120 hertz, you know, a lot of the motion blur, a lot of the signage in a soccer stadium would disappear as the camera panned and whatnot. I was actually traveling with I won't put anybody on the spot, but as I traveled with various clients throughout the show, a lot of the vendors would ask, so, you know, are you launching any 4K? Are you launching any anything like that? And of course, UHD1 was launched in Canada arguably first. With both Rogers and Bell, and a lot of people said, yeah, we tried it, but you know, it's not really worth it. There's not really much of a business case anymore. People don't notice the pictures being that much better. On my side of it, I think of the lowly HDMI cable, which is the one thing that needs to die before we can all watch good UHD anything. Yeah, so to me, it just didn't strike me as a lot of great interest in launching new services. We do see a lot of interest in 1080p 60. In fact, a lot of people suggest that 1080p 60 with higher dynamic range, because there is no such thing as HDR, and I hate it when people talk about it as an absolute. But a lot of people say it upconverts better than most of the native UHD that we have. So just a couple of little random pictures of 4K and 8K. This is at the Ikegami booth. I was remarking how thick the monitors are. in terms of 8K. But you see some of the typical things that resolution bring. Higher res pictures are inherently less bright than low res pictures. The motion blur issue is still a very, very significant part of the whole UHD thing. So until frame rates get much faster and displays improve. Equipment is shrinking. I notice a lot, as I walked through the show, a lot of people had little things that did things with small cameras and small switchers and things. So I was surprised at how many little things there were throughout the show. So again, this is back to that Norwegian company, but I mean, this is a universal controller of some sort, but it's tiny. It looks like Barbie and Ken could take one of those home. And then a lot of small camera attachments and whatnot. I would say there are blissfully few drones and 360 cameras, for example, that were just littering the things 2 or 3 years ago. They were there, but it was just not the same degree of penetration as they once were. GoPro was actually back. They didn't seem to be having their draws anymore, but of course they were one of the original small camera companies. And this was kind of neat. This is a Canadian-made product. This is a remote camera system. So basically you grab the pan tilt and all the normal camera controls, and it remotely tracks you on the head and the other end. So I thought that for a very, and it's a very physically very, very small thing, I thought that was quite an interesting little idea. The IP dilemma. Those of you I have conversations with outside of trade shows and whatnot, I'm fairly opinionated on this. I think the industry is stuck right now between legacy SDI hardware and IP. Clearly, the supply chains for IP or for legacy SDI hardware are beginning to diminish. Companies are consolidating. You've got this paradigm of very, very inexpensive equipment. And then your legacy, very expensive, big hardware. So more and more people are questioning, well, why would I buy the traditional big, expensive hardware? IP is just around the corner. I'm going to be able to run software and replace just about everything. But still, by many, IP is seen as the bleeding edge. In fact, a couple of key clients in Canada have said, you know what? We're just going to wait this out for a little while and let somebody else have the headache. And that opinion is sitting there in maybe half or more of the business right now. So, there's not a great cost advantage to IP. There's all sorts of, those of you who've been involved in IP projects, especially hybrid SDI IP projects, you find they're pretty cantankerous in terms of the deployment and usability. So, and yes, the SDI product supply chains are shrinking. In fact, is there anybody from SMPTE here today? It was interesting because SMPTE and Christie have joined something called SDVOE. Has anybody ever heard of that, SDVOE? So SDVOE is a completely different IP thread that's proprietary and owned by a group of companies. And SMPTE and Christie are two of the main investors in it. So it's interesting to see the one ASIC manufacturer left in our industry actually investing in something outside of it versus SDI chips. So, and one of the things I point out as well is we're an industry, where everything in the physical infrastructure of most of the North American broadcast industry is between 8 and 12 years old. It's as old as the HD rollout. So, we've got an aging infrastructure. We've got obviously new higher video standards for UHD and 3G and whatnot, and yet you have an industry more or less sitting on its hands right now, waiting for things to improve. And this Stan will sit there, putting his jacket over his head as Steckley launches into this again. I really think the AMWA SMPTE disjoint hasn't necessarily been productive. I know it's not seen that way through a lot of other eyes, but I do believe they did proclaim at the SMPTE conference that they don't see that not everybody sees a need for anything that AMWA is doing, for example, to ever go to a standards body and be given a standard. So it may happen, but nobody's racing to do it. And I thought about the interop. It seemed to be kind of losing its momentum. I've heard a number of suppliers saying that, well, there's not really a lot to be gained in going in with the other companies to an interop anymore. We can do most of what we need to do in our own facilities. So it seems to be losing a little bit of its zip. So there is the interop. So normally what I do at NAB is I take about a dozen pictures, which I'm not going to bore you with tonight, of all the empty space I found at NAB this year. So there was a lot of empty space in the central hall, but there was the interop sitting at the back of the hall across these tables. Obviously, these are the regular suspects that work on the interop. And I noticed a lot more AMWA discussed versus SMPTE. When you really look at 2110, for example, there hasn't been a lot going on with 2110, not a lot of new numbers being issued or whatnot. To me, it feels like most of the deployability issues are being addressed at AMWA.
Paul, do you mind if we interrupt you on
Yeah, please.
this? From the IP showcase point of view, it's not really interop anymore. The interop's been done. The interop and testing was actually done a couple of weeks before in Houston. We will kick in.
Yeah, so there's the JTM tested program, which is basically making sure that all the equipment passed or could work or meets the standards. And so all we were doing there was just showing a list of the tests and stuff. So we don't, I mean, because the interop was sort of done, we intentionally weren't showing it at the event. Because the industry has now moved forward. So we're sort of past that interop issue. So now we're moving on to sort of testing standards.
And that's interesting because for someone like me who is even more involved in the industry versus a casual attendee, I would have just walked by that and said, look, it's not as busy or as in-depth as it used to be.
That's a really good point. It's this image.
Yeah, so I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
We're into the details.
Yeah. No, I've always said, like I say, if someone in my end of the industry can't easily find that information out or it is not landing at me, how is the average attendee?
Yeah, if you didn't talk to someone and pick up the pack of 4 pages, you wouldn't know.
Yeah. Anyways, well, I'm sure other people will talk about so the interop isn't really an interop anymore. It's an IP showcase, I guess, is what it is. It's, I did notice that that JTNM is almost doing a sort of a ad hoc certification, like they talked about JTNM tested stuff. I was so kind of curious because I know that came up in SMPTE over the years, and we always stayed away from actually saying something was standards compliant.
So SMPTE is actually now working on a PICS document in support of that. So SMPTE is now actually moving forward in support of that.
Okay. So I'm sure some other people can chime in on what things like group hints and other stuff, some of the AMWA work was done. The future of NAB. So Sunday is the new Monday. So one of the things that was discussed, and there was a poll of exhibitors as whether they should back the show up and start it on the Sunday. People said it used to be on the Sunday, and I guess I'm going to them so long now, I don't remember ever going on the weekend to an NAB, but we obviously did because it used to be over a weekend. So there is it's still going to be a 4-day show, but it's going to start, the exhibits will start on the Sunday versus the Monday. I hear a lot of NABs trying to figure out the attendance issue for core broadcasters. One of the comments that comes is that with travel budgets and other expenses being cut in broadcasters, getting people, like it used to be a foregone conclusion that everybody showed up at NAB every year. And it's not really the case anymore. So there's some discussion about how to solve the attendance issue, and the idea is that maybe a Sunday for people who go on their own ticket, at least they don't have to take a vacation day. There was a little bit of talk about a series of regional shows. Obviously, we've seen things like the NAB New York grow and seems to be doing pretty well. And they're building a new North Hall, and the NAB still says it will occupy the whole Las Vegas Convention Center, to me, which is something I would really like to see the North Hall get collapsed and the show could easily.
The deal on that is the new hall, which ultimately isn't north anymore, it's actually.
Yeah.
It's going to be called the West Hall.
It's the West Hall, sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's open in
Oh, okay.
And at which point, during 2021, they will take the North Hall down.
Yeah. No, I heard it was replacing the North Hall. And I keep wondering, does that mean we'll just have to walk farther to get to the new one?
Well, the way the show looks to me with the wider aisles and everything, maybe they won't have anything in it.
Yeah, no, I like I say, to me, the physical geography, it's not funny when we all have to, when our customers say, look, I'm just not zipping back and forth. I'm just not doing this. If you haven't noticed, the industry isn't getting any younger. You know, the idea that we're walking. Anyways, the show the footprint could absolutely shrink. Yeah, so that was it. In 2020, Sunday is the new Monday. And of course, I always find a couple of interesting things at NAB. Of course, the dancing robots were back there again. And I actually talked to somebody, I can't remember who it was, where it was, but I actually talked to somebody at the show that said that they had actually used one of those things in some sort of production. I always thought they looked ridiculous to see a camera on a welding robot, and who the heck would use them? Those of you who know me, I'm a bit of a car nut, and this Lamborghini with some sort of stabilized thing on the front. I can't imagine that a Lamborghini with that much weight hung out the front of it would go very well. But anyways, it's just one of those crazy things that you see at trade shows from time to time. And this is not from NAB. This is from Korea. So I was in Korea in February. And like I say, in some of the NAB marketing, there was talk about 5G. And I don't know, did anybody see any 5G, really good examples of 5G and what it's going to do at the show? But it was in some of the bylines and whatnot. So there were a bunch of the national holiday in Korea, and these trucks claimed to be streaming live 4K on a single 5G link. And as some of you said, it's probably, one person. But again, I think back to the era of the news trucks, where we built all these news trucks, bonded cellular, and now we're looking at potentially moving very big resolutions over a simple 5G link. And that's it.
Well, thank you, Paul. So next up, we have Will Isbister. Did I get that right? Yeah. Excellent. From Ryerson. And he's going to tell us what it was like from a student's perspective. For those that don't know, there are a number of Ryerson students who attend the conference every year. And the SMPTE Toronto section was happy to sponsor a portion of their trip. So it was great to see them. You can't miss them. They were all in very bright shirts with a big SMPTE logo, and all the other great Canadian sponsors that contributed. So over to you, Will.
Thanks. So as Andrew said, my name is Will, and yeah, it's been my, 7th year going to NAB. This year I took a different approach than I've normally taken. Every year in the past I've gone to the show floor and I've just gone through the exhibits, which has its benefits because, as I'm sure you all know, it's really busy Monday, it's really busy Tuesday, and then Wednesday kind of dies down, and then Thursday you're actually able to have decent long conversations with people because they're not running around and they're tired, and they're happy to just have a conversation with you about whatever it is in their booth or about whatever you've seen that week. But this year I bit the bullet and picked up a pass to the Post-Production World Conference, which was really interesting, and it allowed you to talk to people who are normally very busy during the show because they're running their conference, or they're running between two things, or they're dealing with whatever. So for me, my favorite part was being able to talk to a few producers and a few of the legal side that were able to help figure out how to work between the US and Canada. I'm a dual citizen, and so one of the things that I'm going to be trying to do is figuring out how to sort of straddle that line between working down in the States and working up here. And so it was an interesting conversation to talk to them about where to go for business things and what to do about sort of production company statements, I guess. So like whether you're in the California or whether you're in Canada. another thing, as you said, was that there wasn't really anything big this year. It was, as I've said, there are iterative years to the show, and then there are big years. This is what I'd say would have been an iterative year, where everything was just a little bit better. Everybody had, 8K, but nothing was really impressive about it. We had a few things last year that were 8K. I think Sony's video wall was still 8K. And then this year we had Sharp's camera, but it was one 8K camera out of the vast majority that are maybe 4.6 or slightly above that. So I think what we're getting to, which is really cool for me as a student, is we're getting to the point where technology is no longer a limiting factor of what we want to do. And what we want to do now dictates what we use and how we use it. So with 4K, we're able to take shots and punch in. You're going to be able to do that even more with 8K, which I think is a little further than people this year were trying to sell you. But everybody now has 4K workflows down. They have 4K cameras. Getting recordings from 4K cameras in high resolution ProRes, it's now affordable. You can now get a recorder that plugs into a camera and run with it. Now that's what, under $5,000? And so 5-6 years ago, that would have been that was dreamed of. And now, as you were saying, like, we're at the point where all of these costs are down for the independent maker, but they're also, everything's changing to be more on the individual, where, what was it, somebody in a talk was, we call it the 22-22-22. The 22-year-old working 22 hours a day for $22,000 a year. And it's getting, as you probably know, it's kind of ridiculous. It means that you're not able to focus on something, and you're not able to get really good at it. But it means you have a little bit of a better understanding about how everything works and how everything talks to each other. And so that was probably my favorite thing about the post-production world, which was seeing all of that sort of the behind the scenes and talking to the people that do work with all of that stuff, instead of just going to the show floor and talking to people at Blackmagic or Small HD or Atomos or Canon or Sony. And yeah, I don't know. It was just a great time, and any year it's great. And that was one of my favorite things, the networking. It's probably the best thing, as I'm sure you all know. It's being able to talk to, over the course of 5 years, you see everybody. And that was one of my favorite things, is over my 7 years, I've developed relationships with different people that now work at different companies, or that have moved up in the company that they're working at. And so getting back and being able to touch base with all of them on what they're doing at the show, what they're doing in their personal lives, and sort of keep those relationships going, it allows someone in my position to sort of better set myself up for what you're doing in the future. Because I'm sure you all realize, and I'll know that you never know where you're going to be in 5 years, and you never know who you've talked to is going to be somewhere doing something else that's going to need what you do, or you're going to know somebody who can help them with something. And that's what I love about this industry. It's one big, small sort of family. So, yeah, I don't know. It's my little spiel.
Excellent. Thank you, Will. Great, thanks. It was an interesting perspective about the networking. It's not something you think of first and foremost at NAB, but it's absolutely a great opportunity. Next up, we have Matthew Bush with Triangle Post. Matthew's been down this road before. I'll just mic you up here. Poor Matthew had to put up with one of my demos at NAB. And
you did a fine job. You did a fine job.
Right.
So this is, good evening. Oh yeah, here we go. So I'm going to try and do like 15 links in 15 minutes, because that's what I was told we got here. Post-production. So my focus is completely on the post-production side, but to do so I have to understand cameras. But in today's presentation I'm just going to focus through. In coming down to NAB, I had just had a conversation with Netflix, and I was writing a letter back to them, and I said, it's just fascinating to be part of your world right now, the streaming technology and what's going on. We are working in 4K. We are working in the high dynamic range world. And I said, it's just fascinating to be part of this evolution and revolution that we're in right now. Because that's sort of what my take on the market. 5 years of going to NAB as we shifted from HD to UHD, following what's going on, and it's been an exciting road, and I continue to look forward for more exciting times. But it is an evolution and it is a revolution. And I get to Avid's booth, and I see those two words on the top of the booth, evolution and revolution, and they actually delivered this year. Avid is a company that we all know. I'm just using their websites. And they did really take the product up a notch at this particular side. They were able to give us different ways of looking at our bins. So if you look at an Avid, it has a set structure. They've broken that paradigm. They'll allow you to create your own sort of desktop level. They allow you, by doing so, absolutely more flexibility and control. They have the same thing that Blackmagic was touting, which is a different way of editing, a faster way of editing. The need to get your editorial content out of the camera, from the cards, onto your drives, and onto your timeline in the most efficient manner possible. So they allow you to address your timeline. The biggest complaint about Avid is it's the most complex system to use. It is also one of the best systems to use because it is complex and you can do everything you possibly can imagine with an editing tool very, very quickly if you know how to use it. But if you're a new person to Avid, it's going to take you time to get on that curve. So they've created a more simplistic timeline now for you. And as Blackmagic rolls out the editing capabilities of Resolve, this is what they were touting today. So there was sort of an interesting, I don't know if they had insight into what each other were doing, but there was something there. When you deal with your bins in today's world, you know, a typical factual television show that we're working on will have 2400s, 2600 cuts. Take a same Netflix episodic at 44 minutes, it'll have 320, maybe 400 cuts in it. So with episodic shows, you're dealing with a tremendous amount of data. That's where you need to use your bins. Avid's given us a better way of doing it. Navigating content, easy to manage metadata. In today's world, metadata is key because it allows you to tag every video clip with every piece of information you could possibly need. Once you tag it, you can sort it, you can edit it, you can hierarchically stack it, you can do anything you want with it. You can tell the television what you're delivering to it with metadata. So to be able to edit it is a huge skill within an editor's palette. Avid has recognized this and given us these tools. Quickly, I'm not going to do it, I can tell. Biggest moment here is the evolution quality. Quality. Paul talked about the high resolution of 4K. Now we have 8K, which just means a bigger screen. That's all it's really about. But Avid has now given us 16K capability. And I went 16K, but it's exactly what you talked about. The ability to shoot 16K and then work within to the resolution that you need for your final master delivery. Or if you're doing a large sporting event, to be able to do multiple cameras and switch through it. It'll be interesting to see what 16K does to my hard drive systems. We also have, you know, my world is a 10-bit world or a 12-bit world, but now it's a 16 or a 32-bit world. And this is just quality. So this is, again, evolution. We are pushing the quality. As our screens get bigger, we've got to have a better quality content to it. And that's what the companies, Avid was falling behind people. Premiere was pushing ahead of it to give us a better quality actual deliverable file. Avid has now pushed up to the highest, excuse me, the highest professional level. So we are now at, you know, ILM, actually, speaking of ILM, it's probably, yeah, there we go. OpenEXR is a format now for file delivery that addresses the taxing nature of the wider color space and the different approaches that you have to do when dealing with high dynamic range content. It is very demanding on your codecs. Avid now addresses this like the very high-end products, the Flames, et cetera, of the world. So Avid really evolved themselves up. Ooh, see if I can do this. No, I'm going to skip that. Oh, I can start. Okay, I like the challenge of 15 minutes. Avid Nexus, storage systems. We all have storage systems. I thought Avid, again, did a really nice evolution here, but they were part of the revolution also. I've been in the cloud for 4 years. I have 200 and some odd terabytes worth of storage in the facilities. I have a client right now I'm working with has 1.2 petabytes in the cloud. We draw down from it, we push back up to it all constantly. I have 50 terabytes sitting in the cloud right now. The cloud's a great place to be. It's redundant, it's safe, it's data security. There's so many good concepts with it. Avid did a revolution and evolutionary thing where they now give you their storage, but they give you the ability to say, if I'm not using this, let's just push it up in the cloud. Hold it there, take it off your what we call hot storage, go cool or warm, depending on how fast your internet connection is, and have the power, the speed, and the safety of putting media up in the cloud. And it's just a little piece of software that sits on top of the Avid Nexus now. That was impressive to see, but they're not the only person with that story. I'm going to flip now. This is a product that I just put in my facility. It was one of the first, I think, one of the first people in Canada to use this because I had been searching for 2 years to find a product that allowed the creative intent of analyzing an image, working in the wider dynamic range of the video content, and be able for our colorists to actually look at it and see what's going on and make sense of this world of high dynamic range. This is a brilliant product. It evolved this time because it allowed to go into an equipment rack and be addressed on the IP network by any computer within the facility. So part of the revolution is now to have one piece of hardware but be able to access it over the network. And that solved a major problem for us. There's your prize, Paul. What it's allowing me to do is look at a signal, but we now, to the point of high dynamic range, is not. It's a what do you call it, a wrapper that we use to describe it. It's it's three things really going on simultaneously. The big one for me is pushing the new color spaces. We're stepping out of 709. We're sort of stuck in P3 for the moment while the display manufacturers move up. I've got a Sony X300 at the facility, so I'm pushing just the outside limits of the P3, but I need to work within a 2020 color wrapper. So this is how we talk nowadays in color science. This allowed my colorist to say, what do I need to do to make sure that this will pass the distribution channels that are available there? This marvelous new CIE scope, which goes really back to almost the roots of color science, but we now have a tool to analyze it. These bars are measuring our brightness level. I lock at 1,000 nits because I'm in the broadcast television world. We don't do anything theatrical. So we could lock at 1,000. If we were doing theatrical, we'd be up to 4,000. We'd have to be cognizant of up to 10,000 nits worth of brightness. The other, what is the red bar doing? If I remember correctly, the red bar is measuring my percentage when I go out of my piece or my defined color gamut. And I play that edge constantly. As a colorist, you will not stick to the science. You will push the science as far as you can without degrading the image. This is allowing me to watch it. This is a visual representation of it stepping out of it, which is why this is up at that level. But sometimes you just don't see it. So a colorist needs a couple of different tools to work with it. Other than that, it's a really good scope. Like, it just does many different things. But the craft of editing, and particularly the craft of color, and the world now is getting very strong in color because we have this color science available to us, falls back on technical tools to enable us to get a representation of what we're looking at beyond the content, and just really look at it from the signal point of view, which is why I had to join SMPTE to figure out all this stuff 5 or 6 years ago. And it wasn't being addressed by an engineering scope. So this sits in the middle of the world. So it's just a very interesting tool to use. Okay, your favorite people, Blackmagic Dissolve 16. Not that revolutionary this year. They are really moving towards their editing tool, and they need to. They had an okay tool, but it will never meet the expectations of a high volume series editor. Avid still rocks. Premiere works really well, but only in a closed loop environment, not in a collaborative environment, which is why you still see Avid out there in the collaborative world. Resolve could be the product. It has a spectacular color correction product up to a degree, but the editing interface was weak. They did fix it, but it's a classic NAB. You'll see it in about 6 months, and we'll see where it goes from there. There's the cut page. That's the idea that you can work quickly within their timeline. Same thing that Ava was saying to us. Editors need to work very, very fast in certain instances, so let's get them there and let's let them work around all the complexities by slimming down and putting it in a mode that works. Fast review, I'll leave that one alone. This was an interesting box. I have a constant need to calibrate our monitors and look at that. We need to convert our SDI signals to the HDMI signals and get a high quality signal. Blackmagic sometimes comes out with some pretty interesting products. This not only converts our SDIs to HDMI, it'll convert it into an 8K signal, so a very high resolution signal. I can check this with the HDR analyzer. It will allow me one other little piece of magic is I can put my color probe into this box and I can analyze the signal on the monitor. It has its own test generator. It's an okay test generator, but it allows us quick confidence checks on our signals. Once we calibrate it, we can put what is called a LUT inside this box, and that'll set that monitor to that reading. And that resolves a lot of issues because it now allows you to use a computer monitor, and I'll show you one later in the presentation, and use it in the broadcast world because you can now truly control the color outside of it being attached to a computer. So kudos to Blackmagic. This is one time. It's not cheap. This is an $1,800 box here in Canada, I realized today when I went to the website. But it is a very powerful and somewhat innovative new tool from them. Film light, you hear a lot about color grading nowadays. DaVinci Resolve in North America is really there because it is cost effective. It's free to only a point. To use it as a professional tool, it's a whopping $495. This tool is $60,000. You get what you pay for, though. I watch people work in spectral highlights. I watch them look in shadows. I watch the colorists work in detail. And it has tools that takes color science and transcends it into the creative intent of a colorist. It is a spectacular tool. This is what Europe uses for color grading overall. You'll find Quantel Pablo, but more often than not, you'll find the Baselight. As we move into the broader color science, film light as a tool is really addressing what it is when you go in and address something so bright, or HDR is equally so black. It gives you tool sets. Resolve is great, but this really pushes it to the absolute extreme if you need the absolute extreme to do it. Tiger technology, storage system, 128 terabytes, if I remember correctly, worth of it, running 4K work in the facility right now, constantly running out of space because we're working in 4K. So we take that nearline, or we take that hot storage, but we put it off to quality control, but we have to hold on to it till we get quality control to tell us from the broadcaster that it works. Tiger Bridge sits on top of my storage and does what the Avid Nexus Cloud Space does. It says, this is what I called my artificial intelligent media director. I set a series of protocols inside of it. It's strictly software, sits on my network system and says, you're not using this media. I'm going to throw it up in the cloud. Or here's all your media and you want disaster recovery, which is a big thing in the digital world nowadays. And if you're working for Netflix, it's part of your criteria. You must have a disaster recovery plan. This will look at every piece of media that you put on your system, say, okay, well, I'll make you a copy up in the cloud. If you know cloud pricing, it's cheap to put it up in the cloud. It's really expensive to pull it down from the cloud. But if it's disaster recovery, you may not need to ever pull it down from the cloud. It is just a safety factor. This is a brilliant product, Mr. Chris. This one works really well. It was a very smart tool, or a little piece of software, to put on top of a storage system that solves a variety of issues. Sonnet. I work in a global market. We work primarily in nature documentaries. I've got production units around the world sending content to us. Now we're getting their content and we're grading it in HDR because we can do it cost effectively here in Toronto, whereas Europe is charging an exorbitant amount because they all have base lights. I do it on Resolve. The European paradigm pricing is much higher than a North American pricing, but I need my people to look at it anywhere in the world, and ideally I want them to sit in the room. Clearview, SohoNet, has got an IP box. Now I could build this in a variety of different ways, but this is the first one I saw that actually does it nicely. Take your SDI feed, stick it into their proprietary box, which you cannot buy, which is great. You can only lease. And by sticking it in the box, it goes through your device into the box compresses it, throws it up to the web. It has a latency of 6 frames. So we're talking incredibly fast compression, storage up to private servers. Actually, they sit on AWS, so it's semi-private. And you now get the ability to put your signal anywhere you want in the world with a respectable connection. If you were in the UHD world, you would need about a 20 megabit a second. If you're in Toronto, we're blessed with some of the best internet broadband connectivity in the world. We're at 100. Most of you probably are at 100 right now. No problem whatsoever. This sits as a device in the NetEnt suites, but it now lets me broadcast that monitor to any device I want in the world over the internet. They set it up as an enterprise level system, in other words, a fairly high monthly price for a high aggregate user, or you just turn it on and off when you need that service. So it becomes a line item in a budget. If I have a job that I have to show the creative director in South Africa the show, and he's got the internet connection, I say, we'll just do a SohoNet session for you, and he gets to watch it. Once that project's done, I just disconnect from it, and we're done. And that's a fairly reasonable price. So the revolution is in software as a service pricing model. No hardware. They take care of it. They just send it to you, and you turn it on and off. Altered Carbon, if you watch Netflix, it's being done here in Toronto now. They just got the contract. This is what Deluxe is using to broadcast to the people in LA on a daily basis. They just click in, use SohoNet, and now watch their shows. Pretty smart product. On the flip side of that, on the flip side of that, it's not there. One second. What is this product? Yeah. So Frame.io is a product review and approve. We've all heard of this concept. I send a file up to the web. You get to annotate on that file. You get to write notes on that file, and you are commenting on any aspect of that content that you're looking. I can download that file and then work with it. The revolutionary part of this software is that they're now building it into all the systems. So Resolve 16, this is part of it. It has been part of Premiere already. It has been part of Final Cut. For some reason, it's not in Avid yet fully. There is a way to use it in Avid, but they actually built it inside of Resolve this year, and it just becomes the ability to publish a clip, but the clip can be written on, talked to, noted, annotated, markered. You can do so much with the file, and now we, again, are collaborating with people across the world, whoever can download and stream this file. These are smaller files. These are not super high resolution files. Well, you can sort of control that. But the Frame.io, as far as the review and approve piece of software, again, software as a service, $119 a month for the professional level, or $19 a month for a OnePlus user. So a small production can jump onto this. You can turn it on, you can turn it off as you need it. But now we're collaborating with the world again. So part of the revolution right now, particularly in Toronto, as we expand our post to work in Canada or the US, is to use tools that allow us to work out of Toronto and collaborate with people anywhere in the world. This, again, is not live, but as close to live as you can get, in a very powerful tool. So I wanted to recommend it. IMF format. We are moving to a new format. I'm not a big fan of IMF, but it's coming in. It's being written into SMPTE. There's a lot of, oh, sorry, I forgot of one very important thing with Avid. Avid switched their format from a separate set of files, video file and audio essences. You now have the option of going to a blended format, OP1A format, which allows the audio to be blended with the video. That just makes it virtually identical to a ProRes delivery. Therefore, it does now fit within the IMF format, which is why Avid did the Fitch. IMF allows us to take multiple assets, HDR assets, video assets, North American audio tracks, European audio tracks, sorry, metric and imperial. We speak in miles, they speak in kilometers, or the US speaks in miles, Europe speaks in kilometers. I have audio bundles going out at 32, 48 tracks, combined with one video track last year. Well, now that's combined with two video tracks, because I've got the high dynamic range track in 4K, and I've got our HD SDR video track. IMF is a tool to bundle it all together. It's been an equally long development of software. There are some spectacular tools. ColorFront is probably the leader in that market. Again, you get what you pay for. This is $30,000 for the software alone, sitting on another $30,000 piece of hardware. But if you're delivering at the high level to Fox or NBC or to Netflix, if you're in the streaming world, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, they will want an IMF bundle. Depending on the volume that you do, you'll want some very robust software. So without drilling down in the details, ColorFront, it was developed by the people who were one of the original developers of color grading software, which was called Luster. These guys know their color science, and they know it incredibly well. I would recommend, if you're interested in color, just reading information on their website. These guys are brilliant, and they really talk about the difference between acquiring footage and displaying footage, and the difference in what you have to do in the pipeline to make those two transcend from reality to projected image or transmitted image. On the flip side, you can go to a company called Cortex out of the States, which is half the price, does everything that the ColorFront does, just doesn't do it as fast and may not do it as robust. But that's not what I want to tell you about. Cortex, and I debated telling people there because I don't know who's in the quality control world here, but in my world we do a lot of quality control. The one thing that drives us crazy is dead pixels. We see dead pixels. I just read a report earlier today out of our QC where the major rejection was dead pixels, and we can track it to the camera. We can tell you it's to the camera. These are literally one tiny, I wish they had an example here, you know, that's a broken data, I'll call that. But that's what a dead pixel can be. It can be one little pixel in the screen, and our QC people have to catch these things to the best of their ability. And my guys are pretty good at it, but it's taxing to do. There has been no software that I could ever find that actually does it till this. They just introduced it. It's a Cortex dead pixel. It'll actually run the analyze your footage for you, find your dead pixels, and for $15,000, they'll actually repair it on top and give you all the other services. But if you have an Avid or a Premiere or a Final Cut, you're going to have Boris likely. Boris has a beautiful dead pixel fixer as long as you know where to look for it. So Cortex allows you to find it for free. If you want to pay to fix it at the high-fast level, then you use their software. This also is a full IMF bundling, and QC, getting back to the evolution, quality, all these tools have high QC tool sets built within them to analyze your footage, to look at it in a variety of different ways, and then allow you to work or fix it. Sunny. Okay. Yes, there they are. So that's what I have back at the studio. Scientific instrument was the way it was described to me. It's considered the benchmark within the broadcast television industry, not the theatrical industry, but in broadcast television as the go-to reference monitor. And the technology is no longer available. They were so expensive to produce, they had to shift the manufacturing, and they had to come up with a new way of doing it without OLED technology. And this was a particular type of OLED, white OLED technology. Okay, so there's one set of OLEDs. RGB OLED, thank you, Dave. It truly is an unbelievable monitor to look at the image. But was going end of line, though this is today's website, so I guess they have a few left. What they introduced was this, the X310. That prior one was an X300, this is the 310. This uses bonded, you talked earlier about thickness. What they're doing is they're bonding two screens together, and I just wanted to have a little story here. Before I got involved in post-production, I was in the audiovisual world. We worked a lot with 35 millimeter slides. In the 80s, we were looking at our 35 millimeter slides before we projected them on the screen and said, they could be better. I don't know how we figured it out, but we figured if we overexposed one and underexposed the other and then sandwiched those two 35 millimeter films together with the sprockets, we would get a density, we would get a saturation in color, and our blacks would go black. We called it bipacking. That's a bipack TV 40 years later. So it's the same technology, but they're passing the light through a moving image where we were passing it through static imagery. And it works. This is, in my opinion, 99% as good as an OLED by packing the two together. Canon, I saw a spectacular monitor by Canon, which was 2,000 nits across the whole screen packed together. Apple's new spec is 3,000. This is 1,000 nits across the screen. But this uses this new bipack technology, which now all the reference monitors are using until they come up with some other display technology. Because at this professional level, I guess the OLEDs are just out of the picture. So Sony's done a very credible job of producing the next iteration of what is considered the benchmark reference monitor out there. There are a lot of good monitors out there. There are those who like Sony Color Science, and there are the others in the world. I am a Sony Color Science person, both professionally and at home. I've always had an XBR. I find they just represent the world the way I want to see it. And when you see it at this level, you see an image that is equal to what you would see in a projected theater on a film base. It's actually slightly better because it's very hard to get a 4K resolution in a film by the time it gets to a release print. And it really just blows you away when you look at it. This is what we're mastering Netflix type television on or in my world of high-end documentary, in 4K resolution, and now with high dynamic range, which is the wider color gamut, the increased contrast, and the extra brightness as presented by technology. It's actually pushing out light on top of it. I think I'm very close. So we talked about monitors and that LUT box out there. The Sony monitors, or the high-end grading monitors, are $40,000 products. It's hard to outfit a facility with more than a few of those. I struggled to get one, and I'm still struggling to keep that one going. But I have to work in 4K in other ways, and we have to check it. Computer monitors have come so far in this way. This is a single LCD screen, but it's an extremely good one. It is substantially less, I'll just say under $10,000. Represents color and high dynamic range beautifully, slightly less, but it uses an HDMI connection, which is a problem. Go back to the Blackmagic box. The Blackmagic box takes an SDI and converts it to HDI, and now I can put a LUT in that system, and I can now calibrate I have two of these. We can now calibrate these to the same characteristics that we read off the Sony X300. It won't be as good as the X300 because it can't be. It's just not as good a monitor, but we can get it as close as possible by combining a couple of pieces of technology, get in below the $10,000 level, and have an extremely good image monitor to work with. That was my frame IO. And I think that's 15 link. Oh, I have one more, sorry. Got stuck at the airport. And as all things, I don't know, and I just have to tell you, because I am a reader. So I just want to say, given the opportunity, if nobody hasn't read that book, that is one of the best books I've read in absolute years. A Gentleman in Moscow. It is coming out as a television series. You heard it here first. If you haven't read the book, I would highly recommend it. Just walking through at Las Vegas airport on the way out. And it's a great story. So with that, I thank you, and that's my story.
Thank you, Matthew. That was great. Good insights from the post world. Now we're going to throw it over to Brian Young from BizTech for yet another different perspective on what we're seeing at NAB. Hand over the mic.
Handing over the mic.
That way. Okay. There you go. Hello, hello. Everybody can hear me? Yep.
Your PowerPoint.
Okay. So first of all, I'd like to congratulate Andrew on his the way that he handed out the order of the numbers of the presentations, because I don't think it could have ever worked out better if it was planned. So probably in future you should just do it this way, because I think it works out really well. I think again, kudos to Paul. I think is a really high level overview of the whole show was great. The post-production view and everything was great. And then I'm going to sort of give the kid in the candy store, Toys R Us kind of view, okay? So that's what I'm going to talk about, most of the toys that people saw at the show. So again, the real hot topics, I think, this year that were at the show were cloud storage, networked architecture, video over IP, 8K, and a broad variety of new production products. And that's basically what I'm going to talk about mostly, as the broad variety of new production products. Again, my impressions were similar. Attendance was down again, lots of open spaces and sitting areas in Central Hall. And I would also say that there was a lot of booths that had surprisingly expanded beyond belief In other words, they were small companies with very large booths, and what I had heard is that the NAB was handing out some very big, juicy deals for people to take over what would have otherwise been open areas. And the case in point, I know for a fact that GoPro was not going to attend NAB and just decided 2 weeks before the show to attend and took that booth space. So there was a lot of juicy deals being handed out to try and fill up space. And the other thing that I noticed too is that many of the trucks that typically used to be even outside in some of the outside lots, because it never rains anyway, so nothing's ever going to get dirty, so we're actually inside. They actually had, you know, large truck areas inside the hall, in the central hall. So it was kind of strange that way. The South Hall, upper and lower, was extremely busy. Even more so, I think, because a lot of the bigger companies like Ross and Everts and stuff had moved into that hall that were previously in the North Hall. I know. So I think there was some shifting of some of the people around. And actually, another case in point, the Black Magic booth, their wall actually grew by more than 60 feet. I mean, the main aisle used to go where part of their booth was, and they actually put up that aisle, much to the chagrin to the many of the vendors behind them, because it was like it was the Black Magic show when you first walked in the door. It was really kind of crazy how big their booth really was. One thing I guess a lot of people kind of said is that there was no real big game changer, catalyst, big draw. There was no one thing that was like really big buzz like there had been in years past. But there were an awful lot of new products. In fact, probably as many as there's ever been at any other NABs in the past. But there are a lot of little things and incremental things. And there's like virtually everybody was trying to show something new and talk about it. And there certainly were a lot of things that were being teased or talked about just ever so slightly, or hinted at, or whatever, as coming soon, watch something, we'll do something there, or whatever. So a lot, I think, is still in the works. These were just 2 pictures I took. I think the one outside of the South Hall, that was actually from the first morning, on the Monday morning as I walked by. And this was the South Hall at midday on Wednesday, which I was astonished that it was this busy on the midday on the Wednesday. So I thought there was still a heck of a lot of traffic in the South Hall. Usually, again, maybe it's my kind of Sony tattoo still back there. I spent a lot of years with Sony. But usually I find that it's a good place to take the sort of temperature of the overall show. Sony was obviously pushing intelligent media services, cloud, OTT, MAM, archive, streaming, and automated workflows, and all this thing. And in fact, all of these things, which are basically the intangibles, as I kind of call them, you know, Sony's actually starting to say that that's starting to be the core of their business. It's not so much the hardware anymore. The percentage of their business in these intangible areas is actually starting to really grow. So their business focus has obviously changed. But they did introduce a new high-end 4K studio camera with a 2/3 inch brand new global shutter 2/3 inch chipset in it. And they signed a lot of big deals at the show. So they sold, I'm pretty sure, well into the triple digits of that camera system to a lot of the sports networks, large broadcasters and whatnot. So that's going to become sort of the de facto high-end 4K studio camera, is that new camera that they introduced at the show. Venice, they talked about the new high frame rate option, and the expansion kit won a Product of the Year award for the Venice expansion kit. This is the expansion kit that James Cameron's going to be using for his latest little set of movies that he's kind of working on. Yeah, King of the World, right? Anyway, so FS7 build-up kit was another interesting thing. It was kind of a wraparound product with a base plate, a handle, a new back end with an audio bucket, and a new viewfinder for the FS7. Primarily, I'm told, designed for broadcasters to try and make a quasi-cinema camera turn into a quasi-broadcast camera. And, you know, this build-up kit also had an option for 2/3 inch image adapter that you could put on the lens, and so that you could use a standard broadcast 2/3 inch zoom lens. But then when you do that, you're having a crop factor on the imager, so it's actually really only an HD level camera. But for some reason, there's a huge demand in the market for this, for, again, sports market and things like that, where they want to repurpose these FS7s into more of a broadcast type of camera or rebuild them. Sony's big camera announcement was actually a little camera announcement in that they introduced sort of a downscaled version of an X70 type body camera, which was an HD only version of it, lower cost version. Very entry-level model. It's supposed to ship in a couple months. They also showed their 8K studio camera system. They've shown this a couple times previously, but mostly in prototype stage. Supposedly this camera system is going to be, they've sold quite a number of these that are going to be used in the Olympics in 2020. So they're showing this as an operational on set. The other thing in the Sony booth I thought was that was pretty interesting was, you know, there's no big new cameras, but there was lots of new media. So what's that hinting about? I don't know. Because they introduced these new S/S cards, which are faster than their AXS cards that they used for the Venice. Don't know about that. And a new reader, obviously, to read these super high speed cards. These cards have a 10 gigabit per second transfer rate on an S/S card, right? So smoking fast, right? So I think that's really showing some really cool new technology. They also showed a new CF Express card, which is a new version or a new standard, which is the CF body has now sort of bonded, I guess, or made peace with Sony's XQD. And so now the new version is going to be a card that's basically fits in the same slot. It's an XQD sized CF card called CF Express. And that was also being shown in their booth. And they also showed a range of tough SD cards, which are also the world's fastest SD cards, super fast. So I'm not sure what camera actually needs that kind of speed in an SD card camera, but obviously there's something lurking out there. And then they also showed 2 high-speed waterproof SSD drives. So obviously Sony's media business, they still want to try and sell some media. Okay, so they still seem to be in the game. I also saw that HX310 31-inch reference monitor, which also won a Product Year of the Show award, Product of the Year award. Excellent monitor. It was just simply amazing. They had some new HDR firmware updates for the LMD series, and Sony also introduced a new full-size DAC at the show, which is called a PZW 4000 4K XAVC recorder. So it actually has these S/S card slots in it and allows you to record as basically like a VTR XAVC files. And that basically you put it in a live production truck or something like that if you wanted to. They also teased and showed some prototypes of a new UWP wireless that's going to probably come in the early fall. So that might be something that you might want to think about for your September meeting. I don't have one of those guys come, right? Supposedly similar technology, but they also have come up with a new digital shoe that's direct digital connection to the camera with some of their newer cameras and, quote, future cameras, so that you can actually bypass the D to A, so that you're basically going D to D right into the camera. So you don't have to go D to A to D in the camera. You can bypass all that and go direct to D. Lithium-ion batteries, smaller size, a few other faster scan and connection to be able to connect the transmitter with the receiver. How am I ever going to get through all this stuff? Jesus. Anyway, so another camera was the Arri LF. I mean, the LF Mini. This, if there was really any catalyst to the show or any really big announcement, this was a pretty huge announcement, although I think everyone kind of knew it was coming, so it was sort of expected. So it wasn't really as much of a buzz as what people had sort of said, but I also heard that they sold out of these cameras. They're beyond production capabilities already on these. So I think they're doing quite well with it. Fujinon introduced new Premista full-frame cinema lenses, cinema zooms, and they had a little pre-show party, which I went to, and they showed these off on set. So they have two models, a 28 to 100 and an 80 to 250, and these are full frame, basically for the new full frame LF type cameras, and also for the full frame Venice and things from Sony. So quite hot. This is just what their little setup that they had, and you can actually see it on a Venice there on their set that they had on the pre-party on the Sunday night. Canon also introduced a set of full-frame primes called Samir primes. So they have a full set there of 7 lenses that they introduced at the show. The unique thing about these lenses is that everyone was talking about the character of these lenses. They are PL mount lenses, but they have unique character and flaring and unique color, and the way that they present the image has characteristic to it, so they're talking about the difference of a clean image versus a characteristic or stylized or vintage style look that this glass can create, and supposedly creating warmer textures and warmer colorimetry.
Is this the new Volga?
I'm not sure. Okay, Canon also introduced 2 new broadcast 2/3 inch 4K zooms. So obviously there's some broadcast 4K cameras out there that'll take these, so that was of interest. It was interesting though that this was awarded the Best Cinema Camera Award. It was a Blackmagic new Ursa Mini Pro G2, and has a new chipset in it. Has a wider dynamic range, 15 stops, new colorimetry. And it was actually awarded the Best Cinema Camera Award at the show. So looks like the same exact camera, but it's a newer version. And this has actually got a lot of buzz happening around this camera. There was also another version of that camera. It's called the Blackmagic Broadcast, which is basically, again, a 2/3 inch type camera with a full SMPTE fiber back and whatnot, so they can use it for a live production chain in a studio, broadcast studio, live event, house of worship, something like that. And they introduced a new low-cost 4K zoom lens from Fujinon. I think that's it's either 15 times or 16 times 4K quality zoom piece of glass that only can be kitted with this camera. So that's the only way that you're going to be able to buy that piece of glass is with that camera. It's being bundled out of the distributor in the US. So, but that was pretty interesting because it's supposed to be really, really affordable and should also open more gateways for them in those applications. I too noted the DaVinci Resolve 16, which also was awarded Product of the Year by multiple vendors or multiple people. The big news, I guess, there, although there wasn't a lot of things, was this quick editor, and basically saying that now they'll have a, quote, news-y type quick editing interface within it. So they're obviously trying to go after that market. And they also announced a new control panel, which, geez, I don't know. I used to be an online editor. It kind of looks like an online edit controller, and isn't it kind of weird that there's a jog shuttle knob and all this stuff? But anyway, they're saying they need a dedicated controller. Why? So you can cut faster. So they're introducing that to come, and basically that should be probably shipping by end of summer to be able to work. So I think that panel is going to be around $1,000, something like that, for just a keyboard to hook up to your editor. I also saw this interface, which was touched on earlier. One of the things that I sort of caught on, but that you didn't really mention, but is more about this LUT thing and being able to do comparisons, and because it can actually take 4 12G inputs into this box, that you can actually plug it into an 8K monitor and use that basically in the edit suite. as a client monitor, and then you can also do things like side-by-sides or quarter-by-quarters and put different LUTs on it and comparison of different singles and things like that. So that was just one of the other things that they were kind of talking about. Has scopes and everything else that we talked about before built in. This I thought was really kind of cool for them. They're starting to really grow up here. They created a new 8K ATM switcher called the Constellation. It's got 40 12G inputs in it. So it can do 10 8K inputs or 40 12G inputs from Blackmagic. So definitely moving up in the world, I think, right? Definitely starting to make bigger, better boxes. The interesting thing is that, see this rack here, this is one of those switchers at the top of the rack, but if you look down the rack, you'll actually see these devices. And geez, that logo looks familiar. I don't know. I worked for that company for a while, but geez, that logo looks familiar. Anyway, that's their new HyperDeck logo. And it's basically what this is, 2 half racks. And so this side is actually an 8K recorder that can record to CF cards. And this side is amazingly kind of looks like the front of an SR deck. I don't know. Just same shape knob. I don't know. Anyway, another huge announcement for them is they have a battery grip for their new Pocket Cinema camera. It's huge because it takes Sony L-series types batteries and expands the power of this camera, which I don't know if you guys have any idea or concept of how many of these cameras Blackmagic has shipped in the last year. The numbers are extraordinary for a camera that in Canadian dollars is under $2,000 that can do raw 4K. And a micro 4/3 mount. So it's just phenomenally huge. And just interestingly enough, because we were talking a little bit about that Resolve 16, you happen to get a full Resolve 16 key for free with every one of those cameras. So that means they've already added tens of thousands of full suites in the world, or full seats in the world. So definitely these guys are going to be a force in editing in the future, right? Color correction they know, editing they want. Sharp did show, which I thought, won my word is I want to be first award, which is they showed an 8K micro 4/3 DSLR type shaped kind of camera with an 8K sensor in it. This I thought was one of the most unique and different and innovative products at the whole show. It was cool. And what it was called the SlyPod. And it was basically a carbon fiber stick that actually has a tiny motor in it, one of the same motors that's used to move the Martian lander that's on Mars, right? And it moves, that same motor that's in that is inside this stick. And the stick can actually be controlled and programmed so that the stick can go in and out at timed intervals, and we can trigger the camera, and now we can put it on a tripod or whatever, and we can put it on any angle and have ramped ankles and inclines or whatever, or set the stick down on a table and have a basically powered slider. It was very cool. It was very interesting. So it's coming soon. Pricing and stuff is not available yet. They also showed a new Aircross 2 little handheld gimbal, and interesting enough, kind of had a Stormtrooper-like version of that. One of the things that you'll notice about this is one of the reasons I put this in here too, is this picture, I'm glad I remembered it, is notice how the camera is being held in this angle. You go, who in their right mind would ever want to mount a video camera shooting video in a vertical landscape? Why would you ever do that? Ever heard of Instagram? They're starting to make movies for Instagram because kids watch like this, not like this. Wild. And so this gimbal can do that with a more professional camera. Wild stuff, eh? Zion was another big gimbal manufacturer. They showed these products previously, but they were kind of launched right around NAB, so I still consider them NAB-ish. And again, really innovative, different angle, different way of holding the gimbal. Rather than holding it like this with a stick, you can hold it more like a gun. So an interesting way to work your arms and do things, and you can do better horizontals and low angles and all kinds of stuff. So interesting product. Steadicam is back, and they're holding handheld gimbals now. So they introduced a new product so that you can put your handheld gimbals. They'll have two versions of it. One will hold up to a 15-pound camera on a handheld gimbal. So pretty interesting product. So that would hold up to like a RED type camera, or a cinema camera, on a handheld gimbal, and you could hold it all day long, hold it at perfect eye line height, and follow people around, and whatever. So again, it was a product of the year. Canon introduced 5 new cameras, so I guess, you know, there was actually a lot of new cameras at the show, although people didn't say there were too many cameras, but they introduced 5 new XA type cameras, which are single chip, 1-inch 4K type cameras. So these are coming soon within the next couple of months. JVC also introduced a 1-inch 4K camcorder. Interesting, you can kind of see the antennas on the side there because it can also do live network streaming basically off the side of the camera, and also has the built-in sports display. So you can do scoreboard and lower third graphics and whatever can be all done right within the camera. So if you're doing small-time sports and whatever, you can basically stream right back live through the internet and back to the station and stream those kind of feeds out. Panasonic introduced a new 4K PTZ type camera, which was I thought was pretty interesting. They also have a new handheld camcorder, which uses the new HEVC, or high efficiency 4K codec with a 1-inch sensor, and also has built-in NDI. NDI is kind of a standard that was started by Kiki and the gang, and so basically with the TriCaster people, and so it allows you to come back networked, basically it just packetizes video over network IP. Panasonic also showed a little box 8K camera with a good sized lens on it, so I thought that was kind of cute. Rode, I thought they introduced this new wireless Go wireless lav pack that works on 2.4G. It's digital wireless, but you can see how small it is. Sits right on top of the camera. It's kind of interesting because it has a little kind of clip on it, but the clip is the same size as your cold shoe on your camera. So you just pull the clip out and you slip it on the cold shoe, and now you've got your receiver kind of mounted on the camera. And this little transmitter pack has a microphone built right into the pack. So you can just clip it onto the lapel. You don't necessarily need a secondary lav, although it has an input for one if you would like to do that to sort of stop some of the maybe banging around or whatever that you might get out. But for some video bloggers and entry-level kind of street people and newsmakers, they might really like the system. It's very, very, very affordable and very compact. Atomos introduced a new Shogun 7, which is a 1500 nit HDR Dolby Ready Vision monitor, 7-inch, and also has a 4-channel live multicam switcher and recorder, and can also record the new ProRes RAW format directly onto it. So pretty powerful device. Again, sub $2,000 with Dolby Atomos, 1500 nits, pretty powerful monitor put on the top of your camera, monitor recorder. Small HD record or introduced a new Focus Touch 1000 nit HDR, affordable, super affordable, and then they also introduced a new 1800 nit. I think it's 105% DCI-P3 color space on the monitor, and they also have optional firmware or an optional software download key that you can put in so that in the actual monitor you can have touch screen display control of all the camera menus and whatnot. So initially that will be for the Arri cameras, but will come in the future for Sony and other brands like Red and other brands I'm sure in the future. So you'll be able to just do on their monitor, access the menus directly. All of that just goes back and talks through the connected SDI cable, and it just works in the metadata in the background to be able to control the camera through the SDI cable. Another product of the year was the Teradek Bolt 4K transmission system. They showed two models, a 750-foot model or a 1,550-foot model, a 1,500-foot model with HDR capability, full 4K wireless transmission. It looked really, really, really good. They also introduced Teradek RT wireless follow focus, which, interestingly enough, because a lot of your time is spent looking at a monitor, actually integrates with the monitor and puts your focus marks right up there in the monitor. So as you pull focus, you're actually seeing that you're hitting your marks, which is obviously important if you're a cinema focus puller, to be able to monitor and hit your marks accurately. So that was a pretty cool little system. They also have a new Video Go HEVC version, which basically has bonded technology. So this can just do IP out of the box, and then you can just plug in your little bonded antennas into either side of the unit. And now you can do multi-channel cellular transmission and just basically do a hotspot back from your camera from anywhere. LaCie introduced a new rugged 8 terabyte RAID and some new two bays to be able to put more storage in. Nice desktop sort of decorative place to keep your storage. And you talked about robots before. This is one of the things I wanted to talk about. Was in their booth they had one of the things that really showed off how those robots are great in production. They had two of them. One of them, you would place the hard drive into it. They had a waterfall that was a digitally controlled waterfall that they could put logos and words and stuff as the water would sprinkle down and fall. And they had a high-speed Phantom Flex camera on another robot that was on a slider. And basically the one robot would grab the thing, the other one would start off with a shot, the robot would fly back to the other end, and in super high speed they would toss the hard drive through the waterfall and catch it in a backpack on the other side of the waterfall. And they could repeat that shot over and over and over and over all day long because it was being done by robots. So that's basically how they did it, because they could actually hit the mark exactly, and they knew exactly how much inertia was happening within the robot and all that kind of stuff, right? So it was just worked out. Another really cool thing at the show I thought was another storage technology was G Technology introduced this Armor rugged terrain drive, crush resistant up to 1,000 pounds. So if you're really worried about your storage in the field and you need some really, really rugged storage, they're going to have it for you. Zoom introduced a new compact 6-channel F6 audio mixer, which I thought was pretty cool. So again, for onset, if you have 6 channels and you want to be able to do onset mixing and whatever, 6-channel little mixer. They had an F4 and an F8 before, now they put one in the middle. Light panels carved their Gemini in half and made it a 1x1 and won Product of the Year award for it. But basically, it's their same RGB Gemini technology in half the size, making it a lot more portable, easier to carry around, travel, that kind of thing. New super compact RGB light from a company called Hive. It was called the Bumblebee. Very small and compact little round thing. The interesting thing about this light is there's no knobs or controls on it at all. The only way they could control it was with an app on your phone. So, and again, you could paint the light, make it whatever color you want, make it do effects, all kinds of stuff. But it was a cute, very cool little light. Godox, just for those photographers out there, they introduced a new flash system called the V1. A lot of people out there say there's a lot of comparisons to photo type model and whatever. So if you're into that kind of stuff, they introduced a new flash. LEDGO, which a lot of people might not know this brand, but they won a Product of the Year NAB award, their very first, for a new RGB panel called the Dino. Pretty interesting. And they also introduced a whole bunch of new light tubes and stuff. So there's a lot of stuff coming from them, a lot of innovation coming from that company. Basically, this company is the same parent company, owns LEDGO and also owns this brand as well. It's a brand new brand called Nanlite, and they have this new series called Forza that they showed at the show. It's supposed to be shipping in 2 months' time. They had a little portable model, which is this littler one. You can kind of see here in the background, which is a 60 watt, and they had a hand grip that could run off of two Sony L-type batteries. So that's 60 watts of light and a little sort of open face type light that you could actually put in your hand and walk around with or whatever, which is an immense amount of light in this concentrated beam with this kind of PAR dish on the front. And then they had two larger versions with, again, for the photographers in the crowd, full Bowens mounts on those, so you can put any Bowens type adapter onto the front of it. And they also had a series of full-size umbrellas and whatever. So they introduced a 300 watt version and a 500 watt version. And they also introduced a big Fresnel lens that they could put on the front of this. The cool thing about this is the affordability of all of these lights, and the power and the light output means that photographers are probably going to be able to stop using flash and have full continuous light. Like, they're really bright and powerful with full big octaboxes. This controller allows you to put standard V-mount type batteries right in the controller and be able to carry the controller around, put it onto a light stand, whatever. So these are going to be some interesting lights if you're looking for something with a lot of punch and that you can put a softbox in the front of. If you're looking for something even bigger, Cream Source showed a new SpaceX space light that has a color temperature range from 2200 K to 15,000 K. So a lot of people were looking at this space light, brand new. There's a lot of people interested in this light for studios and stuff. It has a full stop of plus minus green magenta control for if you're looking at a space light. Anton Bauer introduced a whole new line called Titan series batteries. Manfrotto introduced some new versions of their Nitro tripod heads and also a couple different leg sets to go with it. Westcott introduced a new lower cost controller for their CineFlex. It's a bicolor only, and they introduced also some RGB longer strip versions. Almost there. And podcasting was a big part of the show this year, and these guys were showing a couple little podcast things. This is a little webcam with a light built into it and a little podcasting mic. Roland also had this neat little podcaster type video switcher that you can switch a couple little HDMI sources and have your gooseneck mic and be doing your podcast or be doing your gaming to Twitch or whatever it is you want. And this was an interesting rig that they had with an even smaller little switcher so that the cameraman can become the switcher and actually switch between two different sources. You can stomp on a foot pedal and switch back and forth. It's kind of interesting. Shape had a bunch of GAC as always, right? So different plates and different arms and different connections and things like that. Data Video had a new intercom over LAN. So Hive, I talked a little bit about some products that are coming. They did a sneak peek of a new Hornet 575 RGB light, probably coming at Cine Gear. We'll get more info on that. That was pretty cool. And Roscoe DMG Lumiere showed a Maxi Mix type light, which is a full, it's basically about 6 feet long and about 18 inches high kind of panel light of their Lumiere type series. And I'm it. Excellent.